Hi everyone, welcome back. So we're going to do chapter 12 today, and then there won't be another video then till Wednesday, and we'll do the next one after that on Friday. So it's in between the phonics lessons, there's not too much going on. So we're up to chapter 12, and this chapter is called What It Said on the Golden Ticket. Charlie burst through the door shouting, "Mother! Mother! Mother!" Mrs. Bucket was in the old grandparents' room, serving them their evening soup. "Mother!" yelled Charlie, rushing in on them like a hurricane. "Look, I've got it! Look, Mother, look! The last golden ticket, it's mine! I found some money in the street and I bought 2 bars of chocolate, and the second one had the golden ticket. And there were crowds of people all round me wanting to see it, and the shopkeeper rescued me, and I ran all the way home, and here I am. It's the 5th golden ticket, Mother. I've found it!" Mrs. Bucket simply stood and stared, while the 4 old grandparents, who were sitting up in bed balancing bowls of soup on their laps, all dropped their spoons with a clatter and froze against their pillows. For about 10 seconds there was absolute silence in the room. Nobody dared to speak or move. It was a magic moment. Then, very softly, Grandpa Joe said, "You're pulling our legs, Charlie, aren't you? You're having a little joke." "I am not," cried Charlie, rushing up to the bed and holding out the large and beautiful golden ticket for him to see. Grandpa Joe leaned forward and took a close look, his nose almost touching the ticket. The others watched him, waiting for their verdict. Then very slowly, with a slow and marvellous grin spreading all over his face, Grandpa Joe lifted his head and looked straight at Charlie. The colour was rushing into his cheeks, and his eyes were wide open, shining with joy, and in the centre of each eye, right in the very centre, in the black pupil, a little spark of wild excitement was slowly dancing. The old man took a deep breath, and suddenly, with no warning whatsoever, an explosion seemed to take place inside him. He threw up his arms and yelled, "Yippee!" And at the same time his long bony body rose up out of the bed, and his bowl of soup went flying into the face of Grandma Josephine. And in one fantastic leap this old fellow, a 96 and a half, who hadn't been out of bed these last 20 years, jumped up on the floor and started doing a dance of victory in his pyjamas. "Yippee!" he shouted. "3 cheers for Charlie! Hip hip! Hooray!" At this point the door opened, and Mr. Bucket walked into the room. He was cold and tired, and he looked it. All day long he'd been shovelling snow in the streets. "Cripes!" he cried. "What's going on in here?" It didn't take long to tell him what had happened. "I don't believe it. It's not possible." "Show him the ticket, Charlie," shouted Grandpa Joe. He was dancing around the floor like a dervish in his striped pyjamas. "Show your father the 5th and final golden ticket in the world." "Let me see it, Charlie," Mr. Bucket said, collapsing into a chair and holding out his hand. Charlie came forward with the precious document. It was a very beautiful thing, this golden ticket, having been made, so it seemed, from a sheet of pure gold, hammered out almost to the thinness of paper. On one side of it, printed by some clever method in jet black letters, was the invitation itself, from Mr. Wonka. "Read it aloud," said Grandpa Joe, climbing back into bed at last. Let's all hear exactly what it says." Mr. Bucket held out the lovely golden ticket up close to his eyes. His hands were trembling slightly, and he seemed to be overcome by the whole business. He took several deep breaths. Then he cleared his throat and said, "All right, I'll read it. Here we go. Greetings to you, the lucky finder of this golden ticket. From Mr. Willy Wonka. I shake you warmly by the hand. Tremendous things are in store for you. Many wonderful surprises await you. For now, I do invite you to come to my factory and be my guest for 1 whole day. You and all the others who are lucky enough to find my golden tickets. I, Willy Wonka, will conduct you around the factory myself, showing you everything there is to see. And afterwards, when it's time to leave, you'll be escorted home by a procession of large trucks. These trucks, I can promise you, will be loaded with enough delicious eatables to last you and your entire household for many years. If, at all time thereafter, you should run out of supplies, you have only to come back to the factory and show this golden ticket, and I shall be happy to refill your cupboard with whatever you want. In this way, you will be able to keep yourself supplied with tasty morsels for the rest of your life. But this is by no means the most exciting thing that will happen on the day of your visit. I am preparing other surprises that are even more marvellous and more fantastic for you and for all my beloved golden ticket holders. Mystic and marvellous surprises that will entrance, delight, intrigue, astonish and perplex you beyond measure. In your wildest dreams you could not imagine that such things could happen to you. Just wait and see. And now, here are your instructions. The day I have chosen for this visit, the first day in the month of February. On this day, and on no other, you must come to the factory gates at 10 o'clock sharp in the morning. Don't be late, and you are allowed to bring with you either one or two members of your own family to look after you and to ensure you don't get into mischief. One more thing. Be certain to have this ticket with you, otherwise you will not be admitted. Signed, Willy Wonka. The first day of February, cried Mrs. Bucket. But that's tomorrow. Today is the last day of January. I know it is. Cripes, said Mr. Bucket. I think you're right. You're just in time, shouted Grandpa Joe. There's not a moment to lose. You must start making your preparations at once. Wash your face, comb your hair, scrub your hands, brush your teeth, blow your nose, cut your nails, polish shoes, iron your shirt, and for heaven's sake get all that mud off your pants. You must get ready, my boy. You must get ready for the biggest day of your life. Now, don't get overexcited. Don't overexcite yourself, Grandpa, Mrs. Bucket said. And don't fluster poor Charlie. We must all try to keep very calm. Now the first thing to decide is who is going to go with Charlie to the factory. I will, shouted Grandpa Joe, leaping out of bed once again. I'll take him. I'll look after him. You leave it to me. Mrs. Bucket smiled at the old man and she turned to her husband and said, How about you, dear? Don't you think you ought to go? Well, Mr. Bucket said, pausing to think about it. No, I'm not so sure that I should. But you must. There's no must about it, my dear, Mr. Bucket said gently. Mind you, I'd love to go. It'll be tremendously exciting, but on the other hand, I believe that the person who really deserves to go most of all is Grandpa Joe himself. He seems to know more about it than we do, provided, of course, he's well enough. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe, seizing Charlie by the hands and dancing round the room. He certainly seems well enough, Mrs. Bucket said, laughing. Yes, perhaps you're right after all. Perhaps Grandpa Joe should be the one to go with him. I certainly can't go myself and leave the other 3 old people all alone in bed for a whole day. Hallelujah, said Grandpa Joe. Praise the Lord. At that point there came a loud knock on the front door. Mr. Bucket went to open it, and the next moment swarms of newspaper men and photographers were pouring into the house. They had tracked down the finder of the 5th golden ticket, and now all they wanted was to get the full story for the front pages of the morning papers. For several hours there was complete pandemonium in the little house, and it must have been nearly midnight before Mr. Bucket was able to get rid of them, so that Charlie could go to bed. And that's the end of a chapter. So it's quiz time. All right. First question. Who does Charlie want to tell first? This is about getting his golden ticket. So he rushes into the house. Who does he tell first? Is it his dad, his mum, Grandpa Joe, or everyone? Who's the first person he tells when he rushes into the house? Dad, Mum, Grandpa Joe, or everyone? It was his mum. He shouts, "Mother, mother, mother," about 10 times. Number 2. What were all the grandparents doing? Were they sleeping, talking, eating cabbage, or eating soup? What were the old people doing? Sleeping, talking, eating cabbage, or eating soup? They were eating soup, yes. Who most wants to go with Charlie? Is it his dad, his mum, or Grandpa Joe? Who wants to go with Charlie to Mr. Wonka's factory? Dad, Mum, or Grandpa Joe? Of course, it's Grandpa Joe. We couldn't be more excited. What does Grandpa Joe do when he sees the ticket? Does he shout hooray? Does he jump up and down on the bed? He shouts, "I don't believe it," or he grins and colour comes into his cheeks. So what does Grandpa Joe do when he sees the ticket? Shouts hooray, jumps up and down in the bed, shouts, "I don't believe it," or grins and colour comes into his cheeks. He grins and the colour comes into his cheeks before dancing on the floor like a lunatic. Right, question 5. What's the first thing the winners will get? So the first thing the winners will get when they get into Mr. Wonka's factory. Is it a cup of tea with Mr. Wonka? A tour of the factory with Mr. Wonka? A truck of chocolate? Or lots of trucks of chocolate? So what's the first thing the winners will get? A cup of tea? A tour of the factory? Truck of chocolate? Or lots of trucks of chocolate? Which one is it? So the first thing they're going to get is a tour of the factory with Mr. Wonka. Okay, what is the date of the visit to the factory? Is it the first day in February, 10th of February, 1st of February, or 4th of February? When is the date of the visit to the factory? The first day in February, 10th of Feb, 1st of Feb, 4th of Feb. Alright, now it was a bit of a trick question there because it is 2 answers. It's the first day in February, and the first day in every month is the 1st. So the 1st of Feb is also an answer. Okay? What time must they be at the gates sharp? Was it 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or 12 o'clock? What time must they be at the gates? 9, 10, 11, or 12 o'clock? It was 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock sharp. Who can go with Charlie on the visit? Is it only one member of his family? Up to 3 members of his family? 1 or 2 members of his family? Or 1 friend or 1 family member? Who can go with Charlie on the visit? 1 member of the family, 3 members, 1 or 2 members, or 1 friend or 1 family member? It was C. 1 or 2 members of his family. Can you remember who's going with him? Who's very excited? It's Grandpa Joe. Grandpa Joe's going to go with him. Okay, that's the end of chapter 12 and the quiz. I'll see you on Wednesday for chapter 13.